Friday schedules. I'm sure you're all keen to disconnect and enjoy the weekend and go out for a drink and enjoy the night. So my name is Trent. I'm one of the co-founders of PHORIA, and we have an exciting little panel for you all this afternoon. Alrighty, cool. So yeah, to begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, whose land it is in which we meet, share and live on today. I'd like to acknowledge the incredible spirit, the creativity, the rich history of storytelling, and the amazing imagination and knowledge that they choose to share with us. It's definitely an inspiration, I think, for all of us as Australians. And I'd also like to acknowledge and pay our respects to their ancestors and elders, past, present and emerging. And I look forward to playing a role and committed, along with our whole team at PHORIA, to actually contributing to the positive, I think, deepening connection in how we can actually celebrate our First Nations peoples and the rich history that we have here in Australia. Cool, so tonight should be pretty relaxed. This is the first event of this kind that we've done in a very long time. It's amazing to be able to do this in person. Definitely thinking of those in other parts of the world that aren't as privileged as we are right now. So yeah, thank you for making the time to come out of your working from home environments and yeah, soaking up an interesting topic that's very close to our hearts. We've got some amazing panelists here joining us. And so to kick off, I'm going to set a little bit of a background, some themes that we're going to dive into, which is this idea that we like to explore at PHORIA, which is XR for good. And then we'll turn it over to our panelists, hear a little bit more about them, and then dive into some Q&A. So if you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you all. Cool. Alrighty, so a little bit of background, who we are, what it is that we're doing in this space today. So yeah, Melbourne Knowledge Week, thanks for hosting us. We're from PHORIA, we're an immersive technology studio based just across the road in Fitzroy. However, it is 2021 and we have a team from all across the world, whether it is the furthest reaches of Frankston all the way across to Russia. It's amazing to be able to work as a distributed team these days and building some pretty exciting technology in this space that we love. And we call it XR. And one of our goals with PHORIA is to create 1 billion transformative experiences. And that could be just about anything in terms of taking people to places that they might not have had the privilege to go and experience, such as diving in the marine depths of Raja Ampat, or whether it is being in hospital and being able to put on a headset and just go anywhere else. And so we're excited to look at these tools and these new mediums and think about the roles that they play and the roles that we play in terms of using them for good effectively. So when we look at what's going on in the world, it's a pretty stark sight that we kind of wake up to each day, without a doubt. So the other week I was participating in an event, the UN Partnerships Forum, and they had a report. It was a report on making peace with nature. And within the report there was a whole bunch of infographics, and this one jumped out in particular. It was looking at the land degradation world maps. But in particular, it was the bottom right image here that it really jumped out and kind of was a pretty gripping sight. It's looking at basically the loss of biodiversity that is happening across the planet. And you can see, obviously down the right, Australia is not doing the best job right now, and it's pretty confronting to think about, what can we do to actually address these problems. And so then on the other side, we're actually thinking about, obviously last year was a hard year for many of us, in our individual ways. But at the same time, the harsh fact is that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have, twice the suicide rate as a non-Indigenous person in Australia. What's our responsibility in this space? And so with these kind of questions and ideas in front of us, we really want to dive in a little bit deeper and think about, technology. Often when we explain what it is that we do, people quickly jump to, a post-apocalyptic science fiction Black Mirror scenario that isn't really portraying this kind of opportunity to use technology for good. And so that's something that we're really keen to just keep diving into and unpacking. And so when we talk about XR, we really mean the spectrum of immersive technology. So it means extended reality. And it kind of covers, you know, three-dimensional media. So we're thinking about how like photos and videos are changing. And then also virtual reality, we can put on a headset and go anywhere. Augmented reality, where you can bring content to life around you. And then eventually smart glasses, right? So mixed reality, blending these two worlds together and kind of overlaying something completely different over the top. And so we've got the technology on one side, but we really want to question, like, how do we harness these tools for good? And, you know, obviously we don't need to reinvent the wheel, so we look at things like the Sustainable Development Goals, and we can kind of break these down into themes and think about, I guess, the pillars and how we can harness some of these tools and address some of the biggest challenges that we face. And so it's really drilling down into these three ingredients, right? It's our connection with nature. You know, we're a little bit detached from the idea that we are nature right now, and so we want to think about how we can use these mediums to foster a deeper connection in. And then also, how can we work with other partners and organizations to then actually achieve more together through collaboration and have a greater collective impact. And then lastly is really just reaching for that higher level of well-being for all, thinking about psychological and spiritual health and safety and how we can actually, you know, ideally achieve greater self-actualization through our lives and through our work and through our play. And so we've got two examples that we'll actually open up afterwards that are our little forays into this space. By no means have we got all the answers. It's really the tip of the iceberg, right? We're just scratching the surface right now. And so in the AR space with Rewild, we're thinking about how we can kind of engage on a deeper level by having a more interactive, embodied experience rather than just passively watching something and having it kind of wash over you. And then alongside that is virtual reality. So we've got three up here. So our journey in working with animals in VR started with David, who we'll hear from in a second, where we wanted to think about how we can connect more deeply with the animals without being more invasive. And we'll hear a little bit more about the work that Zoos Victoria is doing there. And then across to Liz, where we're looking at, you know, mindfulness tools and how we can make it more accessible. Maybe VR can scale some of the existing therapies that are available. And then lastly, experiences like Ecosphere, which we've got on offer, which is really taking you into these environments and meeting the people on the ground, listening to their story and connecting with them on an eye-to-eye, heart-to-heart level. And so we really see there's a lot of promise in this space, but also know it's just the beginning. And so our kind of pivotal moment actually started about 7 years ago, where we actually just saw the power that VR could have in hospital. And so we've actually led two VR research projects just across the road at the Royal Children's Hospital, working with children's oncology and thinking about how you can basically, through different types of existing therapies, kind of, you know, modulate them into VR and make them available, going out into nature, seeing the animals in the zoo. It really is able to scale these different tools. And we've actually been able to measure and record a positive shift in mood and greater well-being for the patients, which is great. And this is just the early days. So we're really excited to see where this goes beyond that. Alrighty, so that's like a little bit of a setting of the scene. Let me introduce these incredible panelists that have taken the time to join us this evening. So first we have Elizabeth Seabrook, Research Fellow at Swinburne University, and we'll hear about in a second the amazing work that she's doing, that we've had the pleasure of collaborating with her on around VR mindfulness and play, so we'll learn a little bit more about that. And then we've got David Methven, who's the Director of Digital Engagement at Zoos Victoria. We've had some fun ideas and explorations, and we'll learn a little bit more about the little cross-section we've had there, but obviously Zoos Victoria have been doing some incredible stuff, especially last year whilst the zoo was closed. And then this fine gentleman who I've had the pleasure of sharing my life journey with, Joseph Purdom, who's another co-founder of PHORIA and our experiential director. So yeah, to kick off, Liz, it would be awesome to give us a brief background, tell us a little bit more about the work you're doing in this space.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Seabrook. I'm from the National E-Therapy Centre at Swinburne University. And what we do there is really look at how we can apply technology to help people with their mental health. One of the things that we run is an online national mental health service called Mental Health Online, and there we provide depression and anxiety programs that people can use in a self-guided way, or also with the support of a therapist, and it's completely free. So across our time at the National E-Therapy Centre, we started looking at how we could use different technologies to support mental health in more diverse ways. So from our internet intervention, which is our Mental Health Online website, to the emerging technologies like VR, one of the skills that we teach often is mindfulness, and mindfulness is really useful for mental health and well-being because it helps you to disengage from those worrisome thoughts or thoughts about ruminating about the past, like causes and consequences of what had happened, and helps to bring your attention to the present. We know from the research that helps with boosting well-being when you practice it frequently and over time. But we also know that it's really hard to do. So if I was to ask you guys to do that now, you'd close your eyes and try to focus on what's going on for you right now, feeling of the breath, it'd be really challenging because there's lots of external distractions going on. You might be going like, ooh, what does the breath even feel like? And getting all those internal distractions going on as well. So we looked at virtual reality as a way to go like, we can put someone in an environment that is as conducive for mindfulness as possible. I suppose part of our research has been, well, what is a conducive environment for mindfulness? So we went through a process of selecting nature scenes with PHORIA and built Place, which is a very exciting initiative for us. With participants, we're basically looking at what their experiences were, what was engaging and disengaging about being in a nature environment, but also what were the things that VR was potentially adding to that experience for them. We've basically gone through a couple of trials now. We know that it increases state mindfulness, which is really good. People also find it a positive experience, so those same feelings that were happening in the hospital, feeling relaxed and calm and positive and boosts in positive emotion. And we've also looked at it in the home, and that's been really interesting for us because people don't use technology in the way you expect them to. But I'm happy to answer questions about that later on and pass it on to the next one.
Cheers, thanks Liz. Awesome. David, how's it going? Do you want to give us a bit of background?
Well. Yes, that was fascinating, Liz. I need to talk to you more. So I'm David Methven. I'm the Director of Digital Engagement at Zoos Victoria. Personally, I think I got about the coolest job title there could be, and I also think I work for a pretty fantastic organisation. So our moral purpose is fighting extinction and creating a future rich in wildlife. So that's what we're about. And so part of that, one element of that is releasing animals in the wild, and after the bushfires you might have seen there was a lot of work that Zoos Victoria did helping animals that were impacted by the bushfires. But a key part of it is connecting people to animals. Now, in the old days, connecting people to animals meant going to the zoo and seeing animals behind bars. Obviously, we're nothing like that now, and we're constantly looking at ways at how we find a connection, find engagement between people and animals while we're really prioritising the welfare of the animals. And right now, like if you went to Melbourne Zoo and you went to try, well, we're not shut now, if you went when we're open, you tried to see Indra, our tiger, Indra could well decide to be behind the bamboo, because for us we prioritise choice and control, and it's up to Indra the tiger to decide where Indra goes. But for a visitor experience, how come I can't see the tiger? And you can see how technology is so critical to finding a way for people to engage with animals without being, as Trent so well put it, without being invasive to the animal. And so at the moment we've got all sorts of ways of doing that with cameras and other techniques and keeper talks, but XR technology is clearly the way of the future of really finding a way that people can really connect with animals. And the only other thing I want to talk about is obviously with COVID, for the first time our 3 zoos shut. So we never shut them before, particularly Melbourne Zoo, we'd never shut that. And Melbourne Zoo is 159 years old. And so as I was saying to Liz, suddenly it was all about digital. There was no other way to engage with the normal visitors. And it was actually a real time of innovation for us. We have so many cameras, and just sticking with Melbourne Zoo, we have so many cameras at Melbourne Zoo, but we've put them all in purely for the welfare of the animals. And so during COVID, it was, okay, how do we use those cameras to make those animals a lot more visible to people who can't come to our zoos? So, you know, things like we had 5 million different views of both just the cameras on the animals. We ran virtual tours of the zoos and keeper talks. We ran virtual keeper talks. And looking at ways to keep using that technology while people now can come to our zoos is a key part of the future. And obviously XR and virtual reality and augmented reality are so critical to this. It feels incredibly early days for that, but we've started working with PHORIA and really loved the way we're progressing, and so that's what I'm really passionate about. Thanks.
Nice. I thought I might just point out some of these GIFs and images behind David here. So this is one project maybe two years, if not 3 years ago, where we wanted to film within the enclosure, and so we're planning to film within a gorilla enclosure. Presumably a VR camera is not the most durable thing, so we had to figure out how to make it gorilla proof. So we fabricated a little steel cage that a VR 180 camera sat inside, and as we're setting it up, I think Yassi can speak to this, but one of the first questions was, is it pee proof? Which I don't think it was, but we managed to work around that one. But you can see a piece of the footage here, which I still think is Ignacy's favourite piece of work that he's made to date. And it's amazing because this is right when the gorilla came up to inspect the camera, and it has these two eyes, so it kind of looks a little bit like a person or an animal. And so you just have this gorilla come up right into your face and kind of inquisitively, you know, poke around, and it's incredible. Like, it's just something that you could never do. Hopefully you wouldn't want to do it in person. And then at the same time, we did a research project questioning, it was one of the keepers feeding the penguins. And then she was just narrating her experience feeding the penguins, finding the best fish basically to feed the penguins. And then a lot of the questions of the participants that went through afterwards were commenting on their experience as if they were the ones feeding the penguins. And so we kind of noted this sense of a bit of an embodied experience where you were then living almost, you know, in the shoes of the keeper, you know, acting out their roles. And so that kind of feedback is incredible, and things that, you know, you just don't hear every day. So yeah, thanks for sharing them. Alrighty. Joe's got a nice profile picture of you up here.
I definitely didn't approve that. I was working, I promise. Yeah, I mean, that's a great place to pick up from, I guess. So I was really fortunate to start this journey at the beginning with Trent and Stephen and a bunch of other incredible co-founders at PHORIA. But a couple of years into that journey, as Trent touched on earlier, I think is really where things took hold for me, which was offering VR to a young girl in hospital with Hodgkin's lymphoma and seeing, I mean, I wasn't able to be physically there for that, but hearing from her clinicians the physiological and mental well-being effects was really moving, and I think that was a huge catalyst for my journey into what is now XR for Good for us, and really aligning our skills in the technology industry with our values in wanting to make the world a better place and provide avenues for accessibility. And I think now I'm so honoured to be sitting here with these two really amazing, capable humans that are in really what would feel like divergent industries from ours, but coming together on, you know, values-aligned projects, and looking to further all of our work in that way. So yeah, I guess I'm really here for seeing how we can use these tools of technology, AR, VR, MR, all lumped into this XR for making the world a better place. And I'd really love to use it for reflecting back on where humanity has come from, and as Trent touched on earlier as well, the richness that lies within First Nations people all over the world. And it's incredible that after everything that's happened, there is still so much willingness to share, and there's just this beautiful shining hope that we can come together. And I think that what we're faced with at the moment is actually an incredible communications challenge of acknowledging where we've come from, addressing the issues that we're currently faced with, and collaborating on solutions. And that's where I think technology has a really unique potential to communicate these tough problems, to provide avenues for, you know, distributed contribution to solutions. And yeah, I feel like there's a little bit of an issue with the sort of fetishization of either dystopian or utopian futures, and I think that it'd be great to work together on what a future full of trees and full of wildlife and, you know, people that are at rest and have great mental health, and a community that is a community, and community not just being this, like, do you know your next door neighbours, but, you know, working together and coming together. And as Trent also touched on, like, just running a company through COVID and having people all over the world and being able to use digital tools to align, and it's been a really beautiful experience. So yeah, I look forward to forging that path. But for me, it's really about holistically integrating all voices on the planet and acknowledging First Peoples knowledge and moving forward towards hopefully technology-driven solutions.
Amazing. Thanks, everybody. I'll just quickly point out this bottom left photo of Jose. So Jose is actually the director for Ecosphere, so if you haven't had a chance to check it out, I suggest giving it a crack afterwards. But it was just a crazy moment where, you know, you're kind of pinching yourself. Jose started as a photographer, videographer, and then picked up these new storytelling communication tools. And this is a VR prototype camera underwater, peacefully tracking a manta ray, and just seeing, you know, a close friend of mine in this crazy situation was a pretty ridiculous moment, not going to lie. That in particular is etched into my mind forever. But yeah, excited to dive in. All right, so a few questions. Start thinking if you've got anything you want to throw at these amazing panelists, now's the time. But to get you guys warmed up, I've got a few questions to start with. So yeah, I guess last year was a ridiculous year, something we never really could have seen coming. But then at the same time, you know, we've changed a lot as a species, right? Like there's definitely some silver linings in there. So I was wondering, yeah, within your respective roles and industries and interests, what are some of the positive outcomes that you've noticed post-COVID? You know,
I can start. So I suppose in mental health, the major shift has obviously been the shift towards telehealth. So we've had telehealth for like quite a long time. It's been available, but there's been some real resistance to actually having that part of the service model. So that was a real silver lining, I think, for last year for all of us working in a digital mental health space. We saw a massive uptake in the services that were already existing, and we also saw our workforce transition to using digital tools, despite the fact that there'd been some trepidation around that in the past. I'm hoping that sort of opened the door to being a little bit more curious about other emerging technologies, both from a research perspective, so how can we use I don't know, AI, XR more effectively for helping people with their mental health and well-being, but also from a clinical perspective. So where we do have well-evidenced tools, having the training pathways and the embeddedness in our mental health system to have technology properly blended in with our mental health care. So yeah, just my 2 cents.
nice. Great.
Yeah, actually, I think, first of all, I'm going to cheat and say last year also there were the bushfires, and you know, much as the bushfires were horrendous, a positive thing that came out of the bushfires was humans' reaction to it, where for the first time the impact on wildlife was very much part of the conversation, and that's actually, you know, really positioned us and given us a real sense of purpose, which has really helped our organisation in giving us a role, because we know there's going to be more bushfires. And to me that was, I'm not quite sure what caused that change in the community, where it wasn't just about the terrible impact on houses and humans, but it was also about the impact on the animals and what services there are in a community building to support and defend those animals. The other part to me is how well-being, that's why I was fascinated what you're saying, Liz, well-being to me in itself has really been elevated. And while well-being's been talked about for a while, it feels like, particularly in Australia with the bushfires and then COVID, we've been through such trauma that well-being is at the top of the list. And it's something that I feel has really changed our organisation, both of the well-being of our staff, and I'll say frankly, when I had my first meeting with my staff, what was most important to me was how we have conversations and support each other about our well-being, as opposed to the work we do, particularly about the zoo, it's well-being of staff, because we've all been through this, and so to me that's a real change. And the final thing is perhaps most obvious, is technology's just had such a leap, and things that just seemed impossible with technology, like we've had video conferencing forever, but no one could quite do it. They always sort of stumbled over it. And yes, there's always tiny problems, but now it's part of the normal operations that yes, we can do that. And there's so many examples of just technology. Yes, it's not our enemy. We can do this, which I think is a real opportunity.
Sure. Should I? Yeah, I guess for me the thing that I've noticed that's shifted the most through the pandemic in a positive way is a global conversation around community. And I know I've said that a lot already, but I think it's really important that as people we're more engaged now. I think people are more engaged than ever in policy making and how that affects them, because it really has affected us all directly. How long do we get to go out for a day? How long do we have to stay in a house? These direct affects on us as people collectively, I think, has brought us together and made us think more about how we want to live as a society. And outside of the obvious, planes stopped flying for almost 12 months, which could have only been positive for the environment. I think the way that we've come together and acknowledged our role in shaping the way those policies come about and who we vote for and how we live as a global community, right down to how we live in our suburbs and how we treat the people around us, I think has been really moving. Like, I know I just live up in the north in Brunswick, and there were a lot of community message boards about, if you're elderly, put your name here and people will go get your groceries in order. And my people in my building, myself, we all engaged in that because it was an opportunity to help each other out on a really personal level. And that combined with engaging, I think globally, everyone is now more engaged as communities in the policy that shapes our lives. And I think that's really, really positive.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and my mother's a psychologist, and she was commenting on the amount of people that she could reach through telehealth now. A lot of people that wouldn't regularly reach out, and then similarly, like I remember reading, like 80% of Australians in some way were all impacted by the bushfires, and there was a massive boost in how many people believed in climate change. And so seeing those moments, hopefully we can stick to it and it can be a watershed moment of sorts. Alrighty, so yeah, I was thinking a little bit more deeply now in terms of behavioural change and thinking about these tools and how they can actually put us in these situations to connect with someone's experience or connect with another animal species or an environment in that respect. Yeah, how do you think immersive technology can be used as a tool to then connect with, say, someone else or something else's experience?
I'm happy to jump in.
Jace?
Jace can go first.
You sure?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can switch it up. I mean, the word empathy gets thrown around a lot in the VR industry, to the point where at VR conferences it's like almost you're not allowed to say it. Good. But it's a powerful thing, and Trent touched on it before with the research that we did with David and the amazing team at the zoo around when people came out of a VR experience where they were just shown a keeper feeding the penguins. They came out of that saying, I fed the penguins. And that felt sense experience in VR is not to be ignored. And I think that that's a real point of emphasis as we move forward, is that we obviously need to be more empathic as a global community, and we need to think about how others have felt, the trauma they might be carrying, and how we can solve some of the problems that are ahead of us. And also, when we're thinking about ecology and the environments that animals live in and the way that they contribute to each other's environments and the interconnectedness of ecosystems, they're all really difficult things to communicate and to feel into. And so knowing that we can produce experiences that have an impact where the user, the experiencer will come out of that with a real, intuitive, felt sense knowledge of that, I think is powerful and something that we should encourage. And I think with any of the experiences that we're producing, if it's a world first or if it's whatever, it's really about holding the door open and making sure that there is a good precedent set for behavioural change, so that other people will feel inspired to do the same, because people will come and do it better than us, hopefully.
Yeah, so I might add to that, because I think you're so right, Joe. And I remember for that particular Penguin VR experience, I think it was one of you two said, just put the goggles on, and because you don't really know till you experience it. And it's so true that it's that emotional connection. And when you're trying to create a community which is really engaged with fighting extinction and creating a future rich in wildlife, you really need to get that emotional connection. But I also want to go to, it feels like this industry is still very early days. And as you guys know so well, one of the challenges when you think of an experience that can be shared widely still exists. I personally still find the goggles, it's a lot to make me put them on, and you have to really get in that experience. And to be honest, it's hard to make it sort of a safe environment. And I'm thinking of visitors to, say, one of our zoos, and we can provide a VR experience, but we want to do it with a lot of people, and we want them to feel like this is something that they're supported with. And it's still very much a solitary experience, and while you're there with the animals and you've got that emotional connection, it's hard to feel part of a community while you're doing it. And I'm really interested in ways that we can help people feel part of a community actually when they're doing the experience, as opposed to what they experience in there.
That's really interesting. So some of the work that we did around the place mindfulness experience was sort of around that sense of safety, and setting's actually really important with VR. So it's not that we're just going to use it in a public space, because it's not socially acceptable to do that, to sit on a train and chuck on your VR headset and just go down to Frankston and then get off. So what we've sort of discovered in that is people are super intentional in the choices they make when they're using VR. So for mindfulness, people were choosing environments that would be conducive to mindfulness without a VR headset. So somewhere that was private, somewhere that was quiet, and somewhere that was comfortable. So I think there's publicly sanctioned spaces for VR where it's like, yes, this is where everybody else is doing it, and I feel safe in this context because there's this understanding, we're all engaged in this experience together. But from an individual perspective, you're still carrying out those behaviours to make yourself feel comfortable. The other point I just wanted to make as well was that virtual reality has sort of been in psychology for a long time, and really around creating emotion. So the first sorts of interventions for mental health were exposure. So that was helping people to overcome fears or overcome trauma. So putting people up really high on a mountain and doing relaxation exercises so that you can get used to that sort of fear. We obviously went for a more positive experience with place, so feeling connected to the environment, feeling connected to positive, relaxing spaces. But I think emotion and communicating that emotion through virtual environments is its core. Yeah.
Great. No spiders yet crawling over people, so we'll wait for that. We actually had another panellist who were hoping to join us from France, Angie Davis. She's actually a producer and writer, works really closely with us every day. So she couldn't make it because she's currently in lockdown and she can't rely on a 3G internet. But I actually asked her this question, and I thought I'd just read it out because it's a pretty beautiful response. So, so how can immersive technology transform the way we think about nature and humanity? She goes, 53 years ago, humans ventured out beyond the Earth's orbit. The photographs that came back from the Apollo 8 mission invoked a fundamental message of the unity and interconnectedness. There was a beautiful planet, floating silently, an ecosphere of wholeness. This message is in line with the cosmological worldview of indigenous traditions, only they didn't need to build a rocket ship to see it that way. I think immersive technology provides us with perhaps a hybrid opportunity to return to that worldview, one that's been lost with the advent of capitalism and industrialization, yet one that we ultimately need to remember. That's awesome. I was wondering, do we have anyone in the crowd that would be open to throwing some questions our way? Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, I'm just kind of holding the paradox of this technology and thinking about, there's some things, just like the pandemic, there's some silver linings, some good, And there's also, obviously, a lot of bad. So thinking about the mindfulness, for instance, and creating this really relaxing world, but actually mindfulness practice is also about dealing with irritation and negative thoughts, and then I'm thinking about the animals in the zoo, and that it's okay that they don't perform. And I think that's really great, that you're kind of finding a solution to not put our human expectations on them. So it's something about the kind of absence of that really interests me. And then, you know, like I did the manatee, not the manatee, the manta ray, was the only episode I did, and I was thinking, you know, it's incredibly beautiful, and I'm seeing the utopian of that species. But what about seeing also the horror, and coming away feeling that sense of responsibility and stewardship and custodianship. So just kind of looking at, you know, is this kind of taking us off the planet, actually, in response to the last statement, you know, thinking, are we kind of saying, well, I don't need to go there. I don't need to take care of it because VR can provide it for me. I can go there. I can see the animals. If they all disappear, fine. You know, I still have this experience of it. So I'm just kind of holding that, and I think, you know, it's, yeah. It's not a question, but what do you do with that? That's the question.
This is something we grappled with as well, because you're quite right. Mindfulness isn't about relaxation and being in a beautiful space. It's about managing distraction. It's about managing uncomfortable experiences. So we started with this prototype experience where it was relatively calming and relaxing and easy, but that gave us those like annoying and uncomfortable questions as well. Is it too easy? Is it just happening to people? So what that actually provided us with was the opportunity to think about virtual environments and like, well, could we make this a better training experience for mindfulness by actually choosing more distracting environments as we go up rather than something that's completely calm and lovely and I just want to sit here all day. There's also VR, it's not perfect. So as much as we're trying to reduce distraction from the external environment and trying to engage people so that the internal distraction is reduced, it's not perfect. People also notice pixelation in the footage as well. So I view it as a tool. It's a bit of a training tool for something that hopefully you then generalize out into other areas of your life as well. So it's not a fix-all solution that you would only engage with. It's something that makes it a little bit easier for those who've struggled. So it helps to engage them in a skill that's beneficial for their mental health. Hope that sort of answers your question statement.
And I've got a couple of responses in two different ways to what you talked about, the paradox. Because one of the paradoxes we face is it feels like what we should provide is a very natural environment when people come to our zoos, particularly, say, Healesville Sanctuary. And technology, keep technology away, it's got nothing to do with that. And that's a constant contradiction that I don't feel is a simple answer. I don't feel it's simply, of course we've got to have technology, but I do think there's no doubt technology has a role, which leads me on to the future, when our core mission is fighting extinction and creating a future rich in wildlife. That doesn't necessarily mean we have animals in our care. It does for the foreseeable future, but I certainly see the probably distant future, but the digital disruption that will happen to us is the way to provide our core moral purpose will be to provide a digital experience that fights extinction and creates a future rich in wildlife. And I think there's constant tension about the natural wildlife and digital, but I think basically they'll work together for a better outcome.
Good answers. What a well-constructed thought that had three distinct pieces in it. Well done. I guess in relation to our technology, I guess you could argue that isn't a utopian future because that is the real world as a result of a no-fish zone marine park being established about 20 years ago. So that is a very direct result of a conservation program that has been hugely successful. And so I guess the hope with things like that is that there are actually existing solutions to a lot of the issues that we're facing. I think you touched on something really valid though, is that in the conservation world at the moment, it's very difficult to make something that hits hard enough for people to realize the damage that we've done to the planet and how urgent action is, that they will still engage with in any way, shape or form. And that spectrum is so broad in that some people will watch Cowspiracy 3 times to be like, I'm never going to eat meat again. But the people that really need to see it are at McDonald's ordering a cheeseburger. And there's this huge disparity between the market that is meeting the content and the content that you can generate that is meaningful to a mass audience. And so I think that that's a huge challenge for the industry. And, you know, overwhelmingly the feedback for Ecosphere has been positive. But some people have been like, oh, it's just another guilt trip. It's like, really? If that's too hard for you, the world is a sad place. But yeah, I think it's a valid comment. I don't have a perfect answer, but I think moving forward, the content that we're going to be focusing on is actually much more around human-centered stories of custodianship and working with First Nations people to share that real genuine connectedness with the land and how special that is and how much that can mean. And a lot of the feedback that we had on Ecosphere that was around like how beautiful the scenery was, but that oh, cool, a manta ray, oh, cool, an elephant, doesn't necessarily link as directly to behavioural change as someone speaking to you about it, especially if the person speaking to you about it has lived on the land sustainably for 80,000 years. So, yeah, we are shifting our approach to that, but it's a very valid point.
Do we have any more questions? Yeah, Shay?
I think the thing that always comes to my mind for this, and I'd like to ask all of you what you feel, is as people who are, you know, touting technology and how much it can impact our natural world, how can we as consumers of technology make sure that we are also being really careful and demanding that, you know, the companies that are providing our tools of technology aren't building in obsolescence, and that we're, you know, doing more resource reciprocity. You know, there's people in Africa that have never even used a cell phone, and we've got 5 in our drawers at home. How do you think, as people who are, you know, on the bandwagon, how can we self-organize to make sure that we are being really responsible and we are holding the companies that are giving us this technology, that they are also considering all of these things that are impacting, you know, our mission and our values to create XR for good?
Well, where do you start? You know, I guess I'll start in sort of very what that means in practice. So for us, when we have a relationship with a company, the contract we sign, the part of the tender process is checking out their sustainable practices. And that can be very challenging. You know, like we've obviously got a contract with Microsoft. How do you get to the bottom of what Microsoft's practices are? But you've got to be that ambitious to be, you know, authentic to what you're about. And so at the zoo, it's all sorts of challenges for us. If you go to our properties, you can buy meat. You can buy less meat than you used to be able to buy. And I'd like to think in a few years we'll be purely vegetarian, because that's authentic to what we're about. And so, you know, there's no simple answer, but to me you start off with that core moral purpose, and that's why I keep repeating it. And every time that you're doing something, you're assessing against that moral purpose. That's obviously from our organisation point of view, but I think that's sort of applicable to the way we live our lives as well.
I don't have an answer for this, but you've got my mind whirring, so I'm going to go away and think about things. But you raise a really good point about digital divide. So it's not necessarily distant all the time. There are still people sort of in local communities who don't have access to the internet and don't have access to smartphones. So that's actually a major challenge in digital mental health, because often there's a rhetoric around it like, oh, this is going to get into rural and remote communities and this will be the solution. We've heard from people who said, I have to travel 2 hours to go to a library so that I can connect to the internet so I can use this digital resource. So I think an awareness of what is and isn't available in terms of technical infrastructure and people's capability and capacity to access it is also really important. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, it's an amazing question. I'm really happy that it was raised. I don't think at this point there's a perfect answer. I think as a technology company that does a lot of device-based experience building, we're very acutely aware that year-on-year redundancy and the rate that technology moves at is at a huge cost to the planet. I think that, you know, we work really closely with Facebook in some of our projects, and the environmental/ethical discussion there is one that we have a lot. All of our experiences with them have been genuinely shaped around making the world a better place, but as a company, that's not how they behave on a global scale. And I think that, like me personally, seeing things like devices go out into rural communities to scale experiences that are hugely beneficial, and when you see that well managed and have like micro libraries where children can tap into social and educational experiences that are really game-changing for them, you can see that there is such an acute potential in this technology to have a positive impact from an accessibility perspective, where you could have an Ivy League education. I don't know if that's something that you want. I don't. In a remote community where you would never have had the financial or, you know, it's geographical access to that before. But I think that in our relationship with Facebook, it's something that we wholeheartedly intend to stick by and stand up to them about and have discussions. We just need to be having those hard discussions. We need to be talking to device manufacturers about built-in redundancy and about year-on-year release cycles and building in longer lifetimes and having greater leaps in technology, but slowing that down. I think I've pretty much recommended this book to everyone I know, I think, but Less is More by Jason Hickel talks a lot about degrowth. And we could do everything in the world to make this like more sustainable, switch to completely renewables, all that kind of thing. If we keep growing at the rate that we're growing and we keep selling everything 3% more than we did last year, there's no way to continue doing that. So I think actually like mitigating growth is going to be a huge part of global sustainability strategies moving forward. But yeah, someone has to have the conversation with those companies. We're trying to, and I think from a community perspective, people that buy headsets are starting to ask those questions. Where does this come from? How long is it going to last? And yeah, it's not lost on us that we're sometimes telling the stories from places where people don't have access to this technology and are potentially exploited in its production. And I think it's a really valid point that needs to be addressed and acknowledged and engaged with.
So we have one last question. Anybody? Okay, cool. That's cool. All right, I have one last question to wrap this up. Just got to say, like, what incredible, inspiring humans that are in front of us. Thanks so much for sharing. And yeah, definitely, I'd love to just do this more frequently. I did have one last question here. So really, all right, last one. So I was just curious in your respective roles, right? So what would you like to see in the future in this XR space, with this XR lens? What's like a positive kind of future that you'd like to manifest in some way as a, you know, more accessibility, you know, greater geographical reach? Yeah, what does the future look like in your industries with this XR lens now?
I think I said before that there's been like 2 decades worth of research in this area, so there's some pretty well evidenced interventions that, you know, would be really good to see rolled out and actually used in practice, because we know that they'd be really beneficial for people. So I think what I want to see is greater uptake of new technologies by the workforce, but that also means training. So I think there needs to be embedded digital training in our pathways for mental health professionals so that they're upskilled, digital capable, ready to go. So when we do have new things rolling off the presses, like virtual reality mindfulness thing, people are willing and capable to pick it up and use it with clients. Yeah.
Great, thanks for that.
I could spend so long on that, but I'm going to focus on one particular thing, which is Melbourne Zoo, which is, I walked from Melbourne Zoo an hour ago, and so it's very much in my mind. And for those of you who know it, it's got a big old heritage brick wall all around it. And one of our key projects over the next decade is a redo of Melbourne Zoo, so it's quite different. And the way we think about it is wildlife in the heart of Melbourne. So the future we hope for Melbourne Zoo is we've got animals running wild there, and the people's interaction is, as Trent used before, it's not invasive, but it is very engaging. And XR to me seems so key to that, particularly for me, augmented reality, when you've got animals in their own environment, in a very natural environment, but you have ways that humans feel really connected to those animals. And you can just see augmented reality is the way where you can overlay the real experience, but you can overlay that in a way which makes it far more meaningful. So that's my dream in 2031, because I think it's quite a way off in this case, that Melbourne Zoo we won't call it a zoo anymore. I don't know what we'll call it, but it will feel like a wildlife oasis 4 kilometres from the city, and technology is the way that people engage with it.
Sounds good to me.
I'm in. It's a tough one. Yeah, it's such a big question, but I guess the thing that sprung to mind for me was around a lot of the projects that are on the horizon for us at the moment are really centred around First Nations custodianship, both in Australia and internationally. And I think what we're looking at in the projects that we're building at the moment is leaving a lot of room for First Nations consulting, obviously, but also creating really thorough capacity building and knowledge share structures so that as we move forward, the ideal outcome is that as the pilot or gateway project is completed, we step away and there's a completely independent, capable, First Nations-led and hopefully staffed entirely team that can continue to expand that capacity for storytelling and knowledge building without us. And I think it's almost like one good friend of mine once said that if you're doing good work, you should be trying to make yourself redundant. And I believe that in so many ways when you're trying to work in conservation or social work or anything. It's like, ideally you don't want a job. Ideally you want to create enough capacity in other people that they can tell their own stories and share that. And I think that as quote-unquote pioneers in the technology space, working with a lot of emerging technologies and building some ourselves, it really is that, back to where I started with that hold the door open approach. Ideally, we just want to build enough capacity that those stories can be told. So I guess the future looks to me like rich in immersive First Nations storytelling that's really easy and accessible to engage with by the public. And I don't know where we are, on a couch somewhere.
Amazing. Alrighty. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. For anyone in the metaverse that chimed in, thanks for joining us as well. So just a little invitation. Half an hour left this evening. We've got Rewild, some fun AR magic. Actually, many of the team that have been building these experiences have joined us this evening. Appreciate you guys dropping in. And then also Ecosphere. So also just come have a conversation too, because that's what this is all about. Great. Well, thank you for your time. Good luck. Good wishes. And it's nice to see you all in person. Have a good one.